JJK Season 3 is officially over, and trust me, I'm as sad about it as you are. However, even though the season is over, and we're probably gonna have to wait somewhere around 18 months to get more sweet JJK action, I think we can all admit that Season 3 of JJK is probably its best ever season, which is surprising on account of the fact that we've barely forayed into the Culling games at all. And yet the fights that were delivered, the animation that it was packaged with, and the characters that were introduced truly, in my opinion, make JJK Season 3, even though it's only 12 episodes as opposed to the 24 of Season 1 and Season 2, the best season of JJK we've ever got. But in this packed roster of 12 episodes, which was the best? And maybe more importantly to some of you, which was the worst? Well, today, that's the question I hope to answer. Because today, I want to talk about every episode of Season 3 of JJK, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video every single week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on to Sasuke versus Gaara. So it's important to note here that while technically there are going to be some episodes that I place at the bottom of this list, I genuinely do not think there was a bad episode this entire season. I would take the worst episode of this season over plenty of the best episodes of other shows. But unfortunately with the list, some things are simply just gonna be better than others. And therefore that brings us to our last place spot, which is rather non-surprisingly the third episode of Season 3 about the Culling games. Listen, when this episode came out, the reception was very mixed. I mean, after all, this episode is just 20 unironic minutes of Tengen ranting on about the rules of the upcoming Culling games. However, ironically, even though it is just 20 minutes of exposition about the upcoming arc, the episode itself is actually not that bad. And the community also thought this episode wasn't that bad, as after all, it sits at a 7.8 on IMDb. And while 7.8 might be a low rating for an episode of JJK, it's an incredibly high rating for an episode that is just 20 minutes of a character explaining how a game works. And honestly, I really don't think the anime could have done a better job adapting this part of the manga if they tried. See, not only did the anime do a substantially better job describing the Culling games than the manga ever did, by using photos and drawing lines between them and creating graphs, but also, at least now, when we had to listen to Tengen drone on about the upcoming Culling games, at least we weren't reading it, and at least it had background music. Really, the only way that the anime could have adapted this sequence better is if they shortened it substantially. Because did we actually need 20 minutes describing all of the rules of the Culling games? No. But Tengen is Gege's self-insert that he uses occasionally whenever he wants to over-explain something to the point of, well, confusing his audience. And the most egregious part about roughly 8% of Season 3 being dedicated to explaining the Culling games is that we didn't even explain everything about them. Episode 3 basically just goes over the rules and what will happen if you break them. But when Megumi comes face to face with Reggie, we realize that we don't know everything there is to know about the Culling games, as Reggie begins to ask rather important, unanswered questions like, why did Kenjaku bring all of these sorcerers back from the past? What's Kenjaku's end goal? What's he gonna do when there's only very few sorcerers left? And so on and so forth. A ton of pertinent questions are lodged that don't get their answers within the confines of what's been animated up until the end of Season 3. And thus we spend 20 whole minutes focusing on the rules of the Culling games that can be explained as simply as, you get 1 point for killing a civilian, you get 5 points for killing a sorcerer, you can spend 100 points to make a new rule, the new rule you make can't break the game, and if your points don't change at all over 19 days, you die. Oh yeah, also if you enter a colony, no takesy backsies, you can't leave. I don't know exactly how long that took, but it was definitely shorter than 20 minutes. And because I'm trying to be my most positive self today, with every single episode we talk about, I'm gonna be calling out my best or favorite moment from said episode. And thus my favorite moment from this episode is the end, but not like the actual end of the episode, but how the episode itself ends, which is that after 20 minutes of Tengen explaining the 10 rules of the Culling games, we are finally introduced to my favorite character in all of JJK, Takaba, which is kind of the only redeeming trait of this episode. Like, yes, does this episode do a better job than the manga explaining the material in the manga? 100%. But if I ever rewatch Season 3, will I rewatch this episode? No, I will skip it every time. But now that our most obvious pick is out of the way, let's get into some of our more contentious picks. Because coming up at number 11 on our list, ranking every episode of the third season of JJK, we have Tokyo Colony number 1, Part 1, or Episode 7 of Season 1. This episode is a transition episode, and I'm not just saying that because Kirara's in it. This episode is supposed to take us from Hikari's underground fight club to the actual Culling games itself, and thus the first 10 minutes of the episode are dedicated to Yuji and Megumi explaining to Hikari and Kirara everything that not only happened over the course of the Shibuya incident, but also everything that's happening with these Culling games. And after Hikari finally acknowledges Yuji's resolve and Kirara is kind of defeated by Megumi and Panda, all of them work together using the new rule instilled by Kashimo to identify players in the Culling games who already have 100 points. And therefore, two teams are formed, Hikari and Panda, and Megumi and Yuji, who go after Kashimo and Higuruma respectively. Now, prior to these 10 or so minutes of sitting around and Hikari trying to kiss Megumi's butt because he's the new head of the Zenin clan, we are served to a relatively cool moment as we see Kenjaku escorting civilians out of the Culling game barriers. And more specifically than that, we get to see Kenjaku interacting with one of Yuji's old Ghost Club friends and thanking her for being friends with his son. But still, the first 10 or so minutes of this episode are just setting up the teams that are going to be sent into the Culling games. And it's not really until Yuji and Megumi plunge themselves into Tokyo Colony number 1 that the episode starts to get interesting. However, unfortunately, the episode gets interesting through the medium of Yuji fighting against Jethead and Propellerhead, two nobodies who serve as a function to introduce a Mai back into the story, who is also a nobody. Now, these fights are fun enough, and they're crazily well animated. However, unfortunately, having a crazily well animated fight isn't really a metric you can use to compare episodes in Season 3 against each other, as every single episode has one. However, there are some fun moments in this episode, like my best moment from this episode, when Yuji slides between the propellers, a Propellerhead turns around and knocks him unconscious by punching him on the top of his head. However, in the case of this episode, I would say that there's not only a best action moment, but also a best cinematic moment. As at the very end of the episode, the director did an incredible job of building tension around the idea of Yuji and Megumi being separated, as both of them walk down splitting paths, following people that they met in Tokyo Colony number 1. In the case of Megumi, it was Scorpion Head Girl. In the case of Yuji, it was a Mai. The usage of distance here between Megumi and Yuji and the people they're following, the shot selection to have the people they're following disappear behind corners simultaneously, and the fact that both Megumi and Yuji were being led to different locations all served as incredible ways to build tension for the next episode. But we won't be talking about that next episode for a while, because up next at number 10 on our list, ranking all of the episodes from Season 3 of JJK, we have Fever, or Passion. Depends on the translation you get, but this is episode 5 of Season 3. Now, it's from this moment on that the episode starts to get really good. Well, yes, our 12 and 11 spots were either boring or exposition heavy. Pretty much everything from our 10 spot on is just objectively a fantastic episode of anime. And episode 5 of Season 3 is no different. See, this episode opens with Principal Yaga's absolutely devastating backstory about how he uses his knowledge about cursed corpses to give families back their deceased loved ones. But after we're done establishing Principal Yaga as one of the best people in the JJK universe, apparently, we see that the Jujutsu Society, upset that Principal Yaga took the side of Gojo, and upset about the idea that he's been withholding the information on how to make a conscious cursed corpse, sends Principal Kentetsu Sai to kill him, something that he is successful at. We're then forced to see Panda discovering the body of essentially his father as he cries, clutching the man who fused together 3 souls to make his. And listen, while I understand that a lot of people don't care about Principal Yaga as a character, and honestly, why should you? I found this opening sequence gripping. It was just powerful enough and just beautiful enough to set up a masterful tragedy at the payoff. And in an arc best known for its fights, it's really nice to see genuine heart-wrenching character development thrust in the middle. However, unfortunately, the rest of this episode focuses on Yuji and Megumi trying to work their way up the essentially corporate ladder of Hikari's underground fighting arena so that they'd be able to recruit him to help in the Culling games. So we get a fake fight between Yuji and Panda that leads into the best actual moment of this episode, which is Hikari and Yuji's 3-minute long rotoscoped conversation, which builds an incredible sense of tension as we stand relatively far away from this conversation and hang on simply one camera angle for the entire duration of said conversation. The decision to display the conversation in this way was psychotic. In an era of bright colors, incredible animation, and constant frame switching, deciding to linger relatively far from a conversation with an almost fisheye view for 3 whole minutes as we watched Yuji try to pass the QuickTime events to impress Hikari isn't a way that I would have ever thought to build tension. However, it works perfectly. And when the conversation eventually breaks down as Yuji pretends to not know Gojo, we're served one of the better moments of the entire season as Hikari tries to train door chop Yuji to death. But we're not done with Hikari quite yet, because coming up at number 9 on our list, ranking all of the episodes of season 3 of JJK, we have Cog, also known as episode 6 of season 3. This episode focuses on what Megumi was up to while Yuji lied about not knowing Gojo. And what he was up to was apparently being a Navy SEAL, as the episode opens with the guy who guards the front door to Hikari's underground fighting ring trying to light up his cigarette. But every time he flicks his lighter, we see that Megumi is standing in his shadow. It's such a cool scene. And from there, Panda and Megumi take out all of the goons around Hikari's hideout until eventually Megumi and Panda are face to face with their real enemy of this episode, Kirara. And this fight is so much better in the anime than it is in the manga. Not only is it substantially longer, but we also get added sequences like Kirara shooting herself forward by pulling herself to coins that she's flicked in front of herself. We fix the issue of Megumi somehow surviving a gravity-crushing flurry of debris by having him jump into a car before he's turned into a cube. And most importantly, we get an added sequence of Panda absolutely thunder-cunting John Rabbit down onto the final mark that Megumi needs to touch with his cursed energy to break Kirara's cursed technique. Which brings us to our other point. If you're one of the 3 Panda fans in the JJK fandom, he is much more involved in this fight in the anime than he is in the manga. And the manga he's kind of just knocked out with the first punch, never heard from again. But is that the best part of this episode? No. The actual best part of this episode is Kirara's face when Megumi tries to tell her that Gojo has been sealed, but she does not believe him. However, this episode also has a weirdest moment, and that is apparently that Megumi has washboard abs. And not even like washboard abs. We're talking like Jinwoo doing sit-ups in the hospital level of washboard abs. But enough about Potential Man's potential to be an underwear model. Let's get to our number 8 spot on this list. At number 8 on our list, ranking every episode from season 3 of JJK, we have One More Time, or episode 2 of season 3. This episode is front heavy. But what we get delivered to us in the first 8 minutes of this episode, well, it can carry an episode. See, because the first 8 minutes of this episode is Naoya versus Choso, and it is awesome. So whether it's Naoya jumping Choso for the first couple of minutes, the heated argument between the two of them about what a big brother's role is on Earth, or Choso filling an entire tunnel with his blood to flush out Naoya as he pops in and out of existence at such a speed that even we as the viewers can barely see what he's doing. This is a high-octane, high-speed teaser for the fight that's about to come between Naoya and Maki, especially when you consider the fact that this fight ends with Choso covering the entire tunnel in blood and using Supernova, a convergence technique that he created over the course of 150 years of perfecting his technique to fill Naoya's back with his blood, poisoning him. However, unfortunately, before Choso's able to finish off Naoya, he's knocked out by Yuta, and rather easily, I must say. And thus, unfortunately, the rest of the episode revolves around Yuta and Megumi trying to bring Yuji back into the fold, trying to tell Yuji that what happened in Shibuya was not his fault. Now, this moment is kind of sweet, as Megumi tells Yuji that he wants Yuji to not only save him, but also his sister. And it is nice to see Yuji have a network of people that he can rely on. But after the sweet moment, the rest of the episode is dedicated to collecting Yuki and finding the Star Room, so Tengen can explain to the earliest rendition of the Kusakabe Coalition what exactly the Culling games are. So this episode is pretty heavily carried by the Choso and Naoya fight. However, the best moment for this episode would obviously have to be Naoya puking up blood because he's been poisoned. Any misery brought to that man makes me happy. But since we're way back at the beginning of season 3, we might as well stay there. Because coming up at number 7 on our list, ranking every episode of season 3 of JJK, we have the first episode of season 3 of JJK, Execution. This might be the artsiest episode of JJK ever made. I mean, it opens with Yuji literally trying to wash the blood off his hands, but no matter how hard he washes them, the blood won't come off, displaying metaphorically in a Macbethian way Yuji's inability to unshoulder the guilt he feels for the events of the Shibuya incident. However, immediately after this beautiful scene, we are thrust into an anime-only sequence where Yuji fights some gigantic flying finger curse spirit thing, only for Yuta to fly in and cut it down in an attempt to kill Yuji. We then, kind of with explanation, I mean it pays off later in the episode, but in that moment in time, without explanation, cut over to the Zenin clan household, which has been the playground for directors of this season of JJK to flex on their viewers just how good they are at shooting unique scenes. Because the opening sequence of us seeing the Zenin clan household is Naoya walking with Maki and Mai's mother down a long hallway as he asks about whether or not Mai is dead, to which Maki's mother replies that it's actually Maki who's on the verge of death. And this conversation pours into all of the descendants of Naobito Zenin meeting in a room with apparently the Zenin family lawyer, as all of them find out that not only is Naobito dead, but Megumi is the next head of the Zenin clan. But apparently even that wasn't enough flexing on us, because the next sequence that we're served to after we leave the Zenin clan household is Yuji sitting alone on an abandoned staircase, basked in the glowing red light of a stained glass window. And that's just the first 11 minutes of this episode. The second 11 minutes of this episode focus on Yuji's iconic clap scene where he summons a bunch of cursed spirits that he exorcises to clean up Tokyo. The beginning of Naoya versus Choso, where we got the first and possibly most prolific of all of the memes we got from JJK Season 3, where Naoya pushes back his hair while fighting Choso. And obviously after that meme, we get Yuta versus Yuji. Now this fight did lead to a lot of complaints, as obviously one of the most iconic scenes from the Perfect Preparation arc, which is Yuji punching a car at Yuta, is cut for some reason, but this is still a knockdown, drag-out fight, as Yuji struggles with the uphill battle of trying to find a way around Yuta's seemingly limitless cursed energy. But still, for me, if I had to identify a best moment from this episode, I would say it's the lamp still swinging in the tiny, cramped room in the Zenin clan household from the scuffle that happens between brothers, as Naoya tells his two brothers that neither of them could be the next head of the Zenin clan, and that lamp throwing their shadows around the room as their tiny lawyer tells them that none of them will be the next head. But enough about the pre-Culling Games episodes. Let's get to the real meat here, because coming up at number 6 on our list, ranking all of the episodes of Season 3 of JJK, we have Tokyo Colony number 1, Part 4, aka Episode 10 of Season 3. This episode is kind of another transition episode. However, it's a transition episode filled with action. So the episode kicks off with Megumi versus Reggie and the introduction of Iori, whose powers work so well when animated. The initial explosion of Iori's eye being dropped down from above to possibly blow up Megumi, I mean, it might as well have been an actual explosion. I haven't seen an explosion animated that well since the last episode of the Hashira training arc. But unfortunately, the fight doesn't immediately focus around Reggie and Iori. First, Megumi's gotta kill a guy named Chizuru. But my god, does he do it. Because not only do we get Megumi using two toads to assist him in choking this guy out, but also we get Megumi throwing this guy off a building for a second time. After which Megumi jumps onto his body, rides him to the ground, bashes the hilt of his sword into his head the whole way down. And just when this guy thinks he's about to get off light, Megumi cuts him down, racking up his first kill of the Culling Games. It's a ridiculously hard sequence. However, unfortunately, even though it is awesome, it's not as awesome as what happens next, which is probably the best part of this episode, the introduction of Takaba as a sorcerer. See, whether it's the constant need to blur out Takaba's junk, the very pregnant pause from Reggie, Iori, and Megumi after Takaba tries to make the no damage joke, or his iconic "I don't want you as my wife" joke that's so bad it literally turns the show into crayon, Takaba being in the show as a sorcerer makes it infinitely better. And while Takaba and Iori's fight isn't great, as it mostly focuses on Takaba hitting Iori with 1,000 years of death and then blasting him with a kick so hard it literally blows him multiple blocks away, the end of this episode does focus on setting up one of the better fights of this season, which is Megumi versus Reggie. Now, that setup is kind of just Reggie biding his time, running away from Megumi. However, the chase sequence of Reggie running away from Megumi as he uses all of his receipts to either summon rock climbing holds or a surfboard to surf on the water made by Max Elephant is probably the second best chase sequence in all of JJK, with the only one being better being Mekamaru chasing Mahito. With the last minutes of this episode, after the chase is done, focusing on a very messy fight between Megumi and Reggie, as Reggie throws a proverbial garage sale at Megumi. And listen, if you haven't liked Mappa's slide into messier action over detail, you probably hated the sequence, but personally, I loved it. Which leads us to talking about the best moment from this episode, which is obviously Megumi's I'm kidding, it's Takaba's sparking. I just rewatched it in dub, doesn't hit nearly as hard. But speaking of Megumi's Chimera Shadow Garden, let's get to our next entry on the list. Number 5 on our list, ranking all the episodes of Season 3 of JJK, we have Tokyo Colony number 1, Part 5, or Episode 11 of Season 3. This is a big Tengen, please shut the hell up episode, as Tengen spends the first 3 minutes of this episode yapping about how because Megumi's domain is incomplete, it doesn't have a sure hit effect. And because it doesn't have a sure hit effect, Hollow Wicker Basket does nothing within the confines of it. See how easy it was for me to say that? Yeah, not that easy for Tengen. Or I should say, Gege, because once again, Tengen is just his self-insert that he uses to overcomplicate his own story. And unfortunately, Tengen just refusing to shut up takes away from how awesome the opening of this episode is. Because the opening of this episode is Megumi just punching Reggie out of his hollow wicker basket. However, unfortunately, if you hoped that Tengen was gonna shut up after Reggie was punched out of his hollow wicker basket, I got bad news for you, because for some reason I and you needed explained to us that cars and elephants are heavy. But don't worry, the episode doesn't really get better, because after Reggie is plunged into Megumi's shadow because he can no longer support the weight of a maximum elephant, we get the relative ass pull of Reggie saying, "Oh, well, these cars I summoned, I didn't give an order to. Therefore, when I bumped into one of my cars, I was able to give it the order to float to the top of this shadow." Whatever. Honestly, I'm not really a fan of anything that happened in this fight within the confines of Chimera Shadow Garden. I mean, Megumi yelling at Reggie that his shadow was above him is kind of sick, but I just don't need Tengen talking over everything. However, after Reggie goes to drop a house into Megumi's shadow, well, that's where this episode gets fun. See, because when Megumi disperses his shadow and has the house Reggie drops break the floor below them, plunging them both into the pool that was in the floor, well, below them, that's truly when this episode begins to hit its stride. Because as we see Reggie climb himself out of the pool, his receipt's now ruined, and we see as Megumi and Reggie begin to walk towards each other, meeting in a communal shower area. This inexplicable tension is built as the barrier of the pool between them disappears. And when they finally do come up to each other and are face to face, while their hand-to-hand sequence is less than 20 seconds long, over the course of those 20 or so seconds, we are served to some of the rawest hand-to-hand combat we have ever gotten in JJK. I mean, we're talking Gojo versus Miguel levels of hand-to-hand combat here. And this sequence is capped with an attack so fast that we as the viewers are barely able to see what happened as Demon Dog takes a final chunk out of Reggie. And there's an awesome talk between Megumi and Reggie as Reggie slowly bleeds out into the pool about how successful sorcerers have to be liars. After which the rest of the episode is dedicated to setting up Hana and Angel's character and the events of the Sendai colony. But while Megumi was fighting Reggie Star, what was Yuji up to? Well, that brings us to our number 4 spot. Because coming up at number 4 on our list, ranking all of the episodes of season 3 of JJK, we have Tokyo Colony number 1, Part 2, or episode 8. This is an episode that's genuinely unlike any other episode from this season. The first half of this episode is dedicated to Higuruma's backstory, which is not only meticulously planned and shot in an abstract and artsy way, but is also just told in a masterclass of storytelling that touches on the real-life issue that 99% of cases that go to trial in Japan end with a guilty verdict. And thus we have to watch as Higuruma struggles in this oppressive system as a public defender trying to see the best in his clients. But even though sometimes if he is successful in avoiding a guilty verdict, if the public yearns to have that guilty verdict, as they tend to do, a retrial can be called and no additional evidence can be put forward, and yet a guilty verdict can still be reached. And thus we watch Higuruma's descent into madness as he's viewed with malicious eyes by the man he was supposed to defend, and his eventual awakening as a sorcerer as he uses deadly sentencing for the first time to kill the prosecuting lawyer and judge who found a guilty verdict. There's also the undercurrent of all of this that the man that Higuruma is defending is a modern-day slave in Japan, a man whose living spaces are provided for him by his company, but he has to pay his company rent that takes up the majority of the money he makes from said company, a real-life thing that happens in Japan to this day. And thus, while we don't get a whole lot of action from this episode, as it more focuses on Megumi meeting Reggie and Yuji meeting Higuruma, this is not only the episode where we see the unveiling of deadly sentencing for the first time, we also get Higuruma's iconic hands to the face moment. And thus the best part of this episode, well, it was all the manga readers who thought that the anime was ruining the representation of Higuruma because they did his hand sequence wrong, when in actuality, they were just referencing a different scene. But since we're talking about Higuruma, let's stick with him as we get to our top 3. Because, ironically, at number 3 on our list, ranking every episode from season 3 of JJK, is Tokyo Colony number 1, Part 3, or episode 9. Now listen, is the first 8 minutes of this episode Yuji trying to lie his way out of illegally sneaking into a pachinko parlor to a lawyer he just met? Well, yeah, it is. And while that definitely isn't the most interesting thing that happens this season, it is our introduction to deadly sentencing and how it works. But you know what is one of the most interesting things that happened this season? Everything the anime added to the ensuing fight between Higuruma and Yuji. See, this fight is also, unfortunately, drowned out by useless chattering from Tengen about how Higuruma has always been a genius, and that's why he's able to use his domain expansion at this moment in time, because he analyzed other people's domains or something like that. What's happening under all of this legitimately useless exposition are some of the craziest action sequences in modern day anime. See, whether it was Higuruma's flying knee that knocked Yuji into the stage, his machine gun gavel attack, or his extending whip gavel that he used to attack Yuji from a distance, everything that happened between the conclusion of the first trial and the beginning of the second trial is peak fight animation, a lot of which that does not happen in the manga. But honestly, it's the emotional payoff of the second trial, where Yuji admits to the mass murder of thousands in the Shibuya incident, even though he was being controlled by Sukuna, even though Higuruma knows it wasn't Yuji's fault, that makes this episode a masterpiece. See, Higuruma coming to grips with the fact that there's still people out there who can feel guilt, remorse, that understand when they've done something wrong, and more than anything, that there's still people out there that are worth saving and protecting and defending, is what makes his backstory so weighty. And thus, as this episode ends with Higuruma and Yuji pulling up chairs across from each other and talking about what it feels like to take a life, you truly feel as though, over just the course of a 2-episode introduction, you know Higuruma like a character who's been around all 3 seasons. And that's awesome. Is it as awesome as a 4-way special grade fight? I'm gonna have to say no, because coming up at number 2 on our list, ranking all the episodes of season 3 of JJK, we have the Sendai Colony. What a way to end a season. I watched it this morning and my God. Listen, it must be World War II level trench warfare for Yuta haters on Twitter right now. I don't know. I don't have Twitter, but I can imagine. Is this the best part of the Culling games? I mean, I'd say so, but there's some other pretty great moments. And wow, did Mappa do it justice. See, not only does this episode open with Druv falling over a railing inside of the stadium he was protecting, but everything about Kuroshi is turned to 11 in this episode. Whether it was the cockroaches that Kuroshi was controlling, ripping a dude in half as Yuta tried to pull him out of the masses, or the crazy acrobatic sequences that Yuta had to go through in order to avoid Kuroroshi's attacks, everything about Kuroshi rather appropriately gave me the heebie-jeebies, especially when the festering sword, which grows bugs in your skin, was unveiled. But Yuta, who understood that he would catch unlimited fraud allegations if he lost to a cursed spirit, healed the festering wounds and bit into a cockroach cursed spirit, filling its body with positive energy and exploding it. And oh my God, the sequence is just so well done. It's so creepy. And then it's a 28-minute episode of just unrelenting action. Dude is fighting against Taco. He's getting turned into Luffy as his arms extend into gum pistols. Ryu's firing the type of granite blast we've never seen before, because now he can fire multiple beams and they're tracking and it's not just a straightforward attack. Yuta's got Ryu in a chokehold. Ryu literally blasts himself backward with a granite attack and blows them back through a wall. And then Ryu draws Yuta into a tunnel. He's firing little beams at him until eventually Yuta gets close enough and he's like, oh yeah, forgot I had this one, and just pulverizes the entire tunnel like he's firing a purple. Highest curse energy output in history, mind you, Ryu has. And Taco's like turning a parking garage into a wave, and like none of it looks bad. All of this could have been CGI ridden nonsense, but it's not. Now, yeah, we skip right over Taco's backstory. We flash it up on the screen like the Culling game rules in episode 2. And yeah, this is one of the 2 times that we ever get to see Druv's curse techniques. But man, when a fight that takes 28 minutes eventually just devolves into Yuta and Ryu beating each other down in a slugfest, and then Yuta hitting Ryu with an orbital strike of his own attack, how could you not love that? Best moment from this episode? I don't know. Pompadours just in general? How about every single time that Ryu's hair overheats, he just turns into Toji? Every dude in JJK with dark hair, the second their hair goes down, you're like, that's Toji. Okay, we get that you miss him. Just, you didn't have to kill him. But unfortunately, even this 28-minute conclusion to season 3 could not usurp our number 1 spot, because coming up at number 1 on our list, ranking every episode from season 3 of JJK, we have Perfect Preparation, also known as the Zenin Extermination episode, or episode 4. Shortly, I don't need to explain this one. It's a 25-minute Kill Bill reference, animated by the Avengers of animation. Maki versus Naoya is given like 3 times more scenes in the anime than it is in the manga. Naoya doesn't run around a mountain to get as fast as possible to supercharge his punch in the manga. Maki kills a guy who can earthbend by plucking out his throat. She slices the top of her father's head off, which is also a reference to Kill Bill. She off-screen decapitates the Zenin clan's #1 ore farmer after being put under the pressure of, I don't know, like the sun or something. It's never really established. She literally slides around a room so hard it kills people. Don't even ask me how she killed that guy who got stabbed in the back of the head. I still do not know, but you don't see me complaining, do you? This episode is not only beautiful, as it opens with the conversation between Maki and Mai, where Mai gives her life to Maki in the form of a cursed tool that Maki uses to cut down the Zenin clan, but from like a sheer fight and animation perspective, it's one of the greatest episodes of anime ever made. And from a shot selection and directorial standpoint, an actual marvel. If I was teaching animation direction, the only pieces of media I would point to as better gold standards than this episode would be the pool scene in the Resi arc and, well, the entirety of Howl's Moving Castle, and also the train sequence from Spirited Away. How do you out-Kill Bill Kill Bill? But with that, that's every episode from Season 3 of JJK, Ranked and Explained. What was your guys' favorite episode from this season? Let me know in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Wow, I knew I wanted to make that video, but I didn't think how much of JJK I was gonna need to rewatch to do it.